Today, we're gonna dive into the deep end of the firearm gene pool. Let me tell you, it gets pretty weird down there. Now, you might think you know guns. You got your AR-15s, your Glocks, maybe even that oddball uncle who swears by his Mosin noggin. But what I'm talking about to show you today, these aren't just weird guns. These are firearms so bizarre, so impractical, and so downright head-scratching that most of y'all never even heard their names whispered in the darkest corners of the gun show. So settle in and let's take a journey through 15 of the most unusual, forgotten, and frankly ridiculous firearms ever conceived. And if you watch this entire video and actually know all these guns, drop me a comment because you might just be the next coming to gun Jesus. But let's kick things off with something that looks like your cousin made it in his garage after binge watching too much Star Trek. Meet the OF-93, folks. This Russian oddball was supposed to be a multi-purpose farming gun, and yes, you heard that right. Farming gun. I mean, picture this. It's a Soviet Union, resources are tight, and some engineer thinks, you know what farmers need? A gun that can handle pest control and looks like it belongs in a space opera. The OF-93 uses a squeeze cocker system, similar to the HK-P7, except instead of German precision engineering, you got Soviet, close enough manufacturing. This thing was chambered for what was basically a 4-gauge shotgun shell, which means it kicked like an angry mule with a grudge. They even made a police version for crowd control, because apparently someone thought, you know what'll calm down a riot? A gun that looks like it was designed by aliens. Spoiler alert, it did not catch on. The OF-93 is proof that sometimes when you try to make one tool do everything, you'll end up with a tool that does nothing particularly well. It's a Swiss Army knife of firearms, if Swiss Army knives were made by people who'd never seen a knife before. Next up, we got China's attempt at making a Thampson submachine gun, and folks, this is where things get entertaining. Meet the Thampson. Yeah, you read that right. Thampson. After World War II, there's a lot of surplus American and Soviet equipment floating around. The Chinese, being resourceful, thought, hey, let's take this American Thompson design and make it fire Russian 7.62 rounds. Like putting a Chevy engine in a Ford. I mean, you can do it, but you're gonna have some explaining to do. But here's the kicker. They couldn't even spell Thompson correctly on the receiver. It literally says Thampson on the side. I mean, come on, fellas. You're reverse engineering one of the most famous submachine guns in history and you can't be bothered to spell check the name? This right here is what happens when you try to combine American design with Soviet ammunition and Chinese manufacturing, all while apparently having your intern handle the engraving. It's like an international collaboration gone wrong, and the result is a gun that's more meme than machine. Now, here's one that sounds more like a knockoff sneaker than a firearm. The UDG MK1, or Mark I. This thing was America's answer to underwater combat, because apparently someone in the Pentagon watched too many James Bond movies and thought, we need that. This was a pepperbox style underwater pistol, which means it had multiple barrels arranged in a circle. Think of it as like a revolver that gave up on the whole cylinder concept and just said, let's put all the barrels up front and see what happens. The UDG Mark I was designed for Navy SEALs and other underwater operators, but here's the thing about underwater guns. They're about as useful on land as a chocolate teapot. You got a weapon that works in one very specific environment, and if you're anywhere else, you're basically carrying expensive ballast. It's like buying a car that only works in parking lots. Sure, it might be great at what it does, but good luck explaining to your wife why you spent the mortgage payment on something so specialized. Speaking of underwater weapons, let's talk about the HK-P11, which I like to call the perfect for underwater assassins with trust issues gun. This German engineer marvel, and I use that term loosely, was an electrically fired underwater pistol. That's right, it ran on batteries, because nothing says reliable weapon like something that needs to be plugged in. The P11 used preloaded barrel clusters that you had to send back to the factory to reload. Let me repeat that for the people in the back. You couldn't reload this thing yourself. You had to mail it back to Germany like you were returning a defective toaster. Imagine being in the middle of a mission and running out of ammo. Wait, hold on guys, I need to fill out some paperwork and wait 6 to 8 weeks for shipping. Please stop shooting. It's the only weapon in history that came with a customer service number. This is German over-engineering at its finest. They took a simple concept like gun that works underwater and turned it into something that requires a PhD with electrical engineering and a good relationship with FedEx. Now, if you thought 5 barrels on a revolver was excessive, let me introduce you to the Enarm Pentagun. This Brazilian beauty asks the question, why stop at 5 barrels when you can be completely impractical? This thing was a bullpup revolving shotgun that looked like someone took a regular shotgun, fed it nothing but protein powder for 6 months, and then asked it to do CrossFit. It was supposed to be the future of combat shotguns, combining the reliability of a revolver with the compactness of a bullpup design. There's just one problem though, it was about as practical as a screen door on a submarine. The Pentagun was so complicated that it made a Rube Goldberg machine look straightforward. You had to pull a ring under the carry handle to charge it, the barrel moved back into the cylinder to create a seal, and the whole thing was so over-engineered that it probably needed its own maintenance manual. They made exactly one civilian model and one police model before someone with common sense apparently walked in the room and said, "What the hell are we doing here?" Here's one for all you Desert Eagle fans out there. The Desert Eagle Carbine, or as I like to call it, what happens when your Desert Eagle hits puberty and bulks up. Some genius looked at the already impractical Desert Eagle pistol and thought, you know, this thing needs to be even bigger and even more unwieldy. So they slapped a longer barrel and a buttstock on it and called it a carbine, like taking a Hummer and making it longer. Sure, you can do it, but at what point do you step back and just ask yourself why? The Desert Eagle's already a hand cannon that most people couldn't shoot accurately. Making it into a carbine was like putting racing straps on a bulldozer. The Desert Eagle carbine is proof that sometimes bigger ain't better, it's just bigger. Sometimes bigger is just silly. Now let's take a trip back to 1944 Soviet Union. Engineers were asking, what if we made the AK-47 but weird? Enter the AS-44, the gun that could have changed history if it wasn't so determined to be different. The AS-44 was one of the experimental rifles that influenced Kalashnikov's design, but it was like the weird cousin that shows up to family reunions with conspiracy theories and homemade jerky. It had potential, but it was just strange enough that you couldn't quite trust it. This rifle was chambered for 7.62 by 41, which later became 7.62 by 39. So close, yet so far. Like they were 1 millimeter away from greatness, but decided to take a detour through Weirdsville instead. The AS-44 died when its designer passed away in 1946, which is probably for the best. Sometimes the universe has a way of course correcting, and this is one of those times. Now, right along with the AS-44 was its twin brother, the AT-44, which is like the AS-44's forgotten sibling that nobody asked for. If the AS-44 was the weird cousin, the AT-44 was the cousin that nobody ever even remembered inviting to the reunion. This rifle followed the same development path as the AS-44, but managed to be even more forgettable. Like they took everything that made the AS-44 questionable and said, let's do that, but take it up to 10. The AT-44 is proof that sometimes being first doesn't matter if you're the first to be wrong. It's the participation trophy of assault rifle development. Now from Germany comes the Steinkamp SW-1, which looks like someone welded spare pipes onto a gun and hoped for the best. This thing's a bullpup lever-action double-barrel shotgun, which is like saying it's a vegetarian meat lover's pizza. Technically you can, but why would you? The SW-1 is designed for hunting, because apparently German hunters looked at regular shotguns and thought, this is too simple. We need something that requires an engineering degree to operate. It's a lever-action bullpup, which means you're working the action behind your trigger hand while trying to aim, like trying to pat your head and rub your stomach while riding a unicycle. Pretty impressive if you can do it, but it's probably not the most practical approach. The Steinkamp SW-1's what happens when German engineering meets German stubbornness. The result's a gun that's more of an art project than a hunting tool. Folks, a PB-39 is basically IKEA furniture in firearm form. It looks like it should work. It comes with confusing instructions, and you're never quite sure if you put it together right. This German anti-tank rifle from World War II was a predecessor to the PB-39, and it suffered from the same problem as most German wartime equipment. It was overcomplicated for what it needed to do. The PB-38 had a self-ejecting mechanism that was so prone to jamming they had to redesign the whole thing. The PB-39 was the improved version, which is like saying the Titanic 2.0 has better lifeboats. Sure, it was an improvement, but you're still dealing with a fundamental design issue. By the time they did get those bugs worked out, tank armor had advanced to the point where anti-tank rifles were about as effective as throwing rocks. It's like perfecting the horse and buggy right as cars were taking over. Just bad timing. And speaking of bad timing, the GB-39 is like the PB-39's forgotten sibling that showed up late to the party. This was a grenade launching variant that fired special grenades that used a modified Kar-98 grenade adapter. It's like they took a perfectly good rifle, made it more complicated, and then wondered why it didn't catch on. The GB-39 is proof that sometimes the solution to a problem is not to create the problem in the first place. This bad boy represents the German approach to warfare. Some works, make it more complicated until it don't work no more, then blame the user manual. Now here's one that was issued to spies who really hated themselves. The Deer gun. This Vietnam-era CIA creation was designed to be distributed to South Vietnamese forces, and it was about as reliable as a weather forecast. The deer gun was basically a single-shot pistol that fired using a spring-loader plunger, like a foam dart blaster that someone forgot to tell was supposed to be a toy. It was meant to be simple enough that anyone could use it, which is code for we made it so basic that it barely qualifies as a firearm. Only about 1,000 were made before someone with common sense realized that giving people weapons that might not work when they need them, well, that's not the best strategy for winning hearts and minds. The deer gun's what happens when you try to make warfare simple and you end up making it simply ineffective. The White-Merrill 1907. Well, this thing looks like a steampunk inventor designed it after a 3-day bender and a complete disregard for ergonomics. This pistol was supposed to combine the best features of both revolvers and semi-automatics, which is like trying to combine the best features of a motorcycle and a boat. Theoretically, it's pretty interesting, but practically, it's dangerous. During military testing, this gun had over 40 different malfunctions in just 110 rounds. That's a failure rate that would make a Soviet-era Lada jealous. It was so unreliable that the military testers probably started placing bets on what would break next. The White-Merrill 1907 featured a Chaluki device for one-handed cocking, and that just sounds like something you'd order at a fancy coffee shop, not a feature on a military sidearm. This pistol is proof that sometimes trying to reinvent the wheel just gets you a square tire. Stoehr Machine gun pistol was designed by someone who clearly had trust issues with conventional firearms. This thing looks like what would happen if you asked an AI to design a pistol but it only fed it pictures of industrial equipment. There is very little information about this gun out there because most of the records have been lost, which is probably for the best. Sometimes history does us a favor by forgetting the really bad ideas. This machine pistol represents the kind of experimental thinking that gives experimental thinking a bad name. They're like a rough draft that someone accidentally submitted as a final project. And finally, we come to the MRC, which is what I like to call codename Airsoft Kid's Wet Dream. This thing was a proposed rifle that existed more in concept than reality, designed by Cry Associates. These are the same folks who brought us some excellent camouflage patterns and apparently some questionable firearm ideas. The MRC was supposed to use 6.8 caseless ammunition with an underbarrel grenade launcher because somebody apparently thought, you know what soldiers need? More complexity and ammunition that doesn't exist yet. Only a few non-firing mock-ups were ever built before someone realized that designing a rifle around ammo that doesn't work reliably might not be the best business plan. The MRC is most famous for appearing in video games where it can be as reliable as the programmers want it to be. This rifle represents the triumph of imagination over practicality, which is great for sci-fi, but not so great for actual warfare. But there you have it, folks. 15 firearms that prove that just because you can, doesn't mean you should. From Russian farming guns to German over-engineering, from Chinese spelling errors to American underwater fantasies. We've covered the full spectrum of seemed like a good idea at the time. Now, I want to be clear here, I'm not making fun of innovation. Every one of these guns represents someone trying to solve a problem or improve on existing designs. The fact that they didn't work out doesn't mean the effort was wasted, because sometimes you need to learn more from failures than success. But let's be honest here, some of these guns are so impractical they make the high point look like a precision instrument. And that, my friends, is saying something. The thing is, these weird guns teach us something important about firearms development. For every successful design like the AR-15 or the Glock, there are dozens of failed experiments gathering dust in patent offices and museum storage rooms. The guns we use today are the survivors of a brutal evolutionary process where only the most practical, reliable, and effective designs make it to mass production. So, the next time you're at the range with your boring old reliable pistol or rifle, take a moment to appreciate that it just works. Somewhere out there, there's a parallel universe where we're all carrying pentagons and reloading our HKP-11s at the post office. If you enjoyed this deep dive into firearms history's greatest what were they thinking moments, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the little bell thingy. We got plenty more weird gun content coming your way, including some hands-on reviews of guns that are actually worth owning. And hey, if you know of any other bizarre firearms that did not make this list, drop them in the comments below. Trust me, there are plenty more where these came from. I'm always looking for new material to roast. But speaking of guns worth owning, you're going to want to check out my next video where I break down the 10 most reliable firearms ever made. Because after all this talk about guns that don't work, we need to restore some faith in firearm engineering. Click that video right there and I'll see you at the range. Come back now, you hear?